It's been 1 month since President Lee Jae-myung took office. It's still early days, but we review the past 30-something days of his foreign affairs and security policies, which he has defined as pragmatic diplomacy. For more on this, we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio with us. Welcome, Soo-young.
It's great to be here.
So, Soo-young, how would you summarize the first month of Lee's pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, indeed, from my perspective, there's been quite an interesting mix of both continuity and change from the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government. In being pragmatic, the Lee Jae-myung administration is clearly keeping Seoul's global diplomacy intact, based on the president's first multilateral summit at the G7. Now, holding at least 10 individual summits with world leaders, his focus there was to reinforce South Korea's position in the international community as a vibrant democratic partner after 6 months of leadership vacuum following former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law decree last year. Now, there's continuity in South Korea's strategic relationships too. Lee's first phone calls with world leaders were made in the order of the US, Japan, and then China. Now, that mirrors the previous Yoon administration's priorities, emphasizing the South Korea-US alliance and a future-oriented partnership with Tokyo. Now, that's been surprising given how past progressive leaders have tended to show more affinity towards China than Japan, emphasizing historical disputes with the latter. However, there has been some recalibration when it comes to working with China and Russia. The former Yoon administration endorsed liberal democratic values as the basis for cooperation. But the new Lee government has indicated it will focus on what serves Korean interests, not necessarily values.
The Yoon government's value diplomacy used values as the standard for all foreign policy decisions. As a result, relations between Seoul and its neighbors, especially China, Russia, and North Korea, rapidly deteriorated. This directly affected Korea's economic and security situation. Thus, the need for pragmatic diplomacy emerged from understanding that value diplomacy alone could not guarantee peace, development, or stability on the Korean peninsula.
On North Korea, Lee's strategy is clearly geared towards lowering tensions. Even in the first month of his presidency, he decided to withhold psychological warfare tactics like loudspeaker broadcasts, while cracking down on South Korean groups sending anti-North Korea flyers across the border. Now, that's a sharp contrast to the tit-for-tat escalation under the former Yoon administration.
And what does his selection of ministers for diplomacy and security tell us about his pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, I would say that President Lee's cabinet picks really represent a decisive pivot towards multilateral cooperation and peace rather than deterrence towards North Korea. Foreign Minister nominee Cho Hyun is a career diplomat with decades of experience in multilateral diplomacy. He's emphasized the importance of diversifying Korea's diplomatic interests, and speaking during a doorstepping interview, Cho said it was time to move beyond what he called the stereotype that diplomacy begins and ends with the United States. Now, at the same time, though, he did acknowledge America's centrality in building peace with North Korea. The nominee for Unification Minister Chung Dong-young is also no stranger to the inter-Korean agenda. He's held the same position under the Roh Moo-hyun administration and played a central role in organizing the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit. Now, he said that he supports the US-North Korea talks, noting that they will help ease tensions on the Korean peninsula and contribute to peace and stability. The appointment of Ang Kyu-baek as defense minister is also noteworthy, I would say. He'll be the first civilian to hold the post in more than 6 decades, representing democratic oversight of the military, particularly after the martial law crisis last year. Now, rather than a strong alliance-based message, An also emphasized the need for a peaceful overture between the South and North, such as the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, to create the kind of mood for military tensions to be eased.
And is the Korea-US summit still expected in late July, and what are the stakes?
Well, until earlier in the week, officials from both governments confirmed that a Lee-Trump meeting in Washington is being arranged, likely set for around July 21st. But over the past few days, there's been some uncertainty after Secretary of State Marco Rubio's 2-day visit mid-month was cancelled. Now, his visit presumably would have finalised crucial details ahead of the bilateral summit. And amid speculation that Rubio will have to prioritise the US leaders' summit with his Israeli counterpart first, the Foreign Ministry said that there was sufficient explanation for America's cancellation and that the two sides are still communicating closely to make sure that the leaders' summit happens. Now, the clock is ticking ahead of the July 8th deadline imposed by Trump on renegotiating America's tariffs on South Korea's foremost industrial goods. Now, that's likely going to top the summit's agenda. But many also expect the US will demand Seoul pays more towards security to cover areas outside their existing cost-sharing agreement, such as the deployment of US strategic assets. Another issue could possibly be North Korea, of course, as Yi moves to lower tensions and Trump signals interest in resuming dialogue with the North.
And there is also a question mark over whether President Yi will accept an invitation from the Chinese government to attend a major military parade, right?
That's right, Unji. The September 3rd celebration is going to be a massive military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, and the numerical significance of 80 years marking a new decade will make the event itself all the more meaningful. The 70th anniversary event in 2015 was attended by then South Korean President Park Geun-hye. But of course, this may raise eyebrows in Washington amid its strategic rivalry with Beijing. So, as a presidential official in Seoul said on Wednesday, it is a rather difficult decision to make. But with the Yi administration seeking pragmatism, and as South Korea will host both the US and China this year at the APEC summit in Gyeongju, some experts say that Seoul should show courtesy to all sides.
It's ideal if Trump goes too. If both attend, so much the better. But if Trump declines, then Korea has to decide. There's still time, so we need careful thought. The celebration only happens once in about 10 years. Personally, I believe Korea should take a bold approach and take up that opportunity to improve Korea-China relations in preparation for APEC.
If Yi is able to hold a summit with Trump first, and possibly with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, then this could clear the path for him to travel to Beijing afterwards. And according to my sources, talks are ongoing with Japan to resume the so-called shuttle of leaders between Seoul and Tokyo.
All right, So Young, let's see what happens later this month. Thank you for that report today.
Thanks for having me, Inji.